Hey guys, Happy New Year! Well, it's a little late to be saying that. I thought I might finish this video in time for Chinese New Year, but that didn't happen. I say Happy New Year anyway because this sculpture is kind of for the new year. It's the next sculpture in my Zodiac collection for Fruits Basket. I started making these sculptures a while back, in 2019. Isn't that crazy? I started with the rat, and then I made the cat, and then the boar, and then the dog, and the snake before my studio closed down. I started with the rat and the cat because they're the main characters from the Fruits Basket series, and they have a lot of good reference images in the books, so I was able to easily look up references, and I felt like I had a strong idea of how these characters should look when I sculpt them. It wasn't until after the first two sculptures that I thought maybe I should do the animal of the current year, and that's when I did the boar. Fortunately, Kagura, who's the boar character, was introduced pretty early in the series as well, so there's some good strong pictures of her too. Having good reference images is important, and you can see my reference here is a horse because that's the next character I'm doing. And if you didn't know, this year is the year of the horse. So that's part of the reason why I decided to do the horse next. But let's come back to that. So far in making my sculpture, you've mostly seen me cut back the amount of clay that I'm working with. It seems like I always do this. I start off with way too much clay, but I think that's better than starting with too little clay. And then I've just been patting it into sort of this oblong shape and comparing it to the other sculptures to see if it's generally the same size. But now I'm getting to the more interesting part. I think of this step as sculpture sketching, because I'm doing a really rough job of making this sculpture, but this part helps me visualize the proportions of everything and make sure the sculpture is the size that I want it to be before I start doing a lot of details. But just because I know that doesn't mean that I feel that way in the moment. Trust me, at this moment I'm thinking, why does this look like crap? Why am I not making what I mean to make? But I also know that it's part of my process, and so I tell myself, I have this internal argument of just do it anyway. Just get through the crappy part until it starts to look good. I really did try to make those legs work, but just like the monkey, I ended up taking all the limbs off. They just weren't looking right, and they were going to be difficult to work around while I worked on the head and sculpting the body. But they served their purpose. They helped me figure out what size the body needed to be to make the horse the right height in the end, so then I moved on to working on the head, which you can see me shaping here. But let's circle back to why I decided to do the horse next, because while it being the year of the horse is a convenient, fun reason, there's also some other factors that go into how I decide which animal to sculpt next. Probably the strongest deciding factor is the number of reference images. Like I said earlier, I started with the rat and the cat because they had a lot of reference images. But after those first few characters are introduced, the accidental transformations happen less and less often. In fact, the last few Zodiac characters you're introduced to only transform once, meaning that maybe they only have one image of them in their transform animal state, which means I have to rely on outside references more. So here you can see in the background I've got a picture of a horse's head pulled up, and I'm working on sculpting a head, and actually I have two heads. So I was having difficulty getting the size of the head in proportion to the body, and so I just ended up starting over and keeping the old one and working on both of them until I felt like I could get them to a point where I could decide which size was right. But there was something else going on. There's something else that was still bothering me and felt wrong about both heads. So while I'm figuring that out, let's talk about those deciding factors again. Now that I'm getting into these characters that have fewer references from the books, I have some other things that I consider. Things like how familiar I am with that animal. I've ridden a horse before. I've not been around a lot of them, but they're more familiar than a tiger. But that doesn't track 100% because I did the monkey before I did the horse, and I've never been around one other than looking in the zoo. So my other deciding factor is how bold or strong that one reference image is, how iconic it feels, and how strong the character's personality feels, like how well I feel like I can communicate it through the animal. Which is why I did the monkey first, because Ritsu has a very strong, iconic image in the book when he transforms, and it was the exact posture I wanted to make this sculpture in because I felt like it really captured his character. Whereas with the horse, with Rin, there are only a couple references, but both times she's in great distress, and I didn't want my sculpture to be that. I wanted it to show her actual personality. Oh, but look. Finally at the part where I figured out what was wrong with the head. So I'm adding more clay above the eyes because I was making the forehead too short, and that was just making everything look wrong. And I was doing that on both heads, so I fixed it, and then I went on to sculpting the body some more. Unfortunately, that's not the end of what was wrong with the head, so I've got to shape the body more so that I can attach the head and really get everything to come together. Now, I do this thing when I'm sculpting that most pottery teachers would probably tell you not to do, and that's just that I take little wads of clay, I dip them in water, and I stick them to my sculpture and blend them in. And this always works for me. I think it's because of how much I move the clay after I stick it, but most pottery teachers will tell you you have to score and slip or score and add water before you make an attachment. And generally speaking, I teach the same thing. But when I'm doing sculpture like this, sometimes I'm working with such small amounts of clay and my clay is so plastic or so soft that I really don't have to score. And I haven't had problems with my sculptures coming apart or fracturing at those connections. Probably because of how much more I mold and shape the clay after adding that attachment. So you'll see me doing both. Sometimes I'm scoring and adding water to make an attachment, and sometimes I'm just dipping that little piece of clay in water and sticking it right on. And that intuition to know when you can break those pottery building rules really comes with time and practice. Okay, it's finally time to stick the head on, and that's way too big. So I'm cutting it down. Still too big. All that work putting more forehead on, and that made the head too big, so now I'm moving the eyes further down the snout instead, and modifying that head until it fits and is proportional. One thing I noticed when I was looking at references is that the length of the head is similar to the height of the torso. So you'll see me hold the head up to the side of the body and measure that proportion. One thing that's interesting about making sculpture is that there's not a scheduled or linear progression the way that there is with, say, pots thrown on the wheel or even hand building more traditional forms. You know, when you're throwing, it's very specific order. You throw the form, you trim the foot, you add attachments. Whereas with sculpture, it feels more like drawing or painting to me because you can go back and forth on the steps. Like here, I'm working on sculpting the body, trying to get the belly to be just the right amount of fat to lean, trying to get the muscles in the shoulders and the hindquarters to really look correct. And then I'll adjust the posture here, adjust the way the neck is turned to make it feel more natural. And later I'll add the head and the legs, which feel more like adding attachments and finishing touches. But all along the way, I find myself going back and making adjustments to the base form, to the torso and the muscle structure, to really make those attachments fit correctly and the proportions look right. So even after I've added the legs, you'll see me shape the belly some more. And it's just a really different mindset when you're sculpting versus making throne pots or more traditional forms like mugs and vases. And I really like doing both. I enjoy sculpture because I feel like I'm kind of discovering what it will be along the way, making adjustments to make it more like what I want it to be and discovering how to make it better as I'm making it. Whereas with other pots, I feel like I need to have a better picture in my mind of what I want the end product to be more successful. With sculpture, I feel like I can learn and adjust as I go on one piece, but you can't alter the form of like a mug as easily, and so I have to learn more from finishing a piece that isn't quite what I wanted and making the next piece and making a couple modifications and then learning from that experience and making the next one. And so it's more learning from multiple pieces rather than being able to make all the adjustments on one piece. Now, I just reset my space because there was a lot of clay crumbs that were getting stuck to the sculpture, and so I wanted to clean those up. And I'm switching gears and making a little platform for my horse to sit on. One of the facts of working with clay is that long, thin attachments or appendages like legs and tails are more prone to breaking or morphing in the firing. The best way to deal with that is to have those thin pieces come back and attach at a second point. The way a handle on a mug is attached at two places keeps it stable. So if you have a long tail, having it wrap back and connect to the body somewhere will create more stability and strength in that attachment. Legs are similar. With most of my sculptures, I've dealt with this by keeping the limbs close to the body, having the animals sitting down so that their legs are kind of tucked under, having the arms wrapped around the torso so that they're not sticking out and easy to break off. But horses are different. It's not as normal to see them laying down or sitting. So my sculpture's gonna have 4 legs, 4 long attachments that could be easily broken, fragile because of the way they're attached and sticking out. Or they could bend under the weight of the sculpture during the firing. I have first-hand experience with this. Back when I first started making these sculptures, I also made a sculpture of a fiery unicorn, a Pokemon Rapidash. And he went through the bisque fire great, but I only put him standing on 3 legs, and in the glaze firing, it was to cone 10, the legs bent slightly, so I'm trying to learn from that mistake. This horse will be standing on all 4 legs, and another great way to deal with this is to create a platform that all the legs can attach to. So that's why you see this slab that the horse has been standing on. Here you can see I'm just testing the height of the horse compared to the other sculptures. I always try to have the rat and the cat nearby when I'm making the next sculpture so that the new sculpture is the same height as the original ones. And because clay shrinks, I try to make the new sculpture a little bit taller than the previous ones, or at least the same height if I'm okay with it being a little bit shorter than the previous ones. So here I am attaching the legs, which is pretty exciting. It makes the sculpture feel more complete. But you'll notice I'm not actually attaching it to the slab. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is having the slab attached would make it a lot more difficult to work on the legs, and I've got a lot more work to do on them. I've got to really blend that attachment from the leg to the torso so that it really feels like one piece and you don't see that seam or connection. And I still need to sculpt the legs. They're a little chunky now and they don't really have any definition or form, so I'll be adding that. So if I attach the platform now, it would be heavy and pull on the legs and misshape them and hard to work around, and the legs aren't their final shape, so who knows if they would be attached at the right points. But all of that may just feel like excuses when I tell you the next part. I don't actually want to attach the platform. I really did consider it, and I really wish that I had put a platform on my other horse sculpture, because then even though the legs bent, it would still have a stable foundation to stand on. And it's really unfortunate because that sculpture's glaze came out perfect. So eventually I'd like to make it some sort of platform so that it can stand. But back to the sculpture at hand. While I know putting this horse on a platform will make it more sturdy, will give it more stability, it really bothers me that it would be the first sculpture to have a platform. None of the other sculptures are standing on a platform or anything. So I think it would make the horse feel like it wasn't really part of the set. It would make it stand out in an awkward way. So I'm hoping that the other things that I'm doing will be enough. I'm paying attention to the placement of the legs, having it stand on 4 legs, trying to space them out well so that it stays balanced. And I'm also hoping that this being a low fire clay, this is terracotta, so it won't get fired to as high of a temperature, even in the glaze fire. So hopefully that lower temperature means that the clay is less likely to slump as well. I'm really spending some time trying to get this one leg to stand right, to look like it's bending naturally. And here you can see my 2 references from the book. Again, not a lot of references, so I'm also heavily relying on photo references of real horses. And that's not new. With every sculpture, I've looked at references of the real animal, in addition to the illustrations from the books. From the very beginning, I didn't want to make a sculpture of the drawings. I wanted to sculpt the animals in my own style, and I'm using the drawings as more of inspiration on how to stylize the animal, and using the personality of the character to guide how I pose the animal, what mood I want them to give off. Like with the dog, I made him really self-confident and looking forward and sitting upright to communicate that. But the character of the monkey is a lot more shy, so I tried to make the monkey look more shy, clutching his tail, looking a little more bashful. And with the horse, I went alert, a little bit tentative. I think that this is a pretty easy mood to communicate with the horse, with the ears up and forward and the head raised but not raised too high. Kind of like just checking it out, making sure things are okay or if they need to react. You can see here I'm still adjusting the legs, trying to make sure that this horse is going to be really stable. And I'm going to keep working on and refining the legs later when they've dried a bit more, but for now I'm moving on to the mane, which is both exciting and daunting. You see, the character Rin, her long flowing hair is a big part of her character design. But it's kind of funny because when she transforms into the horse, her mane is very simple. It's not long, it's actually pretty short. But again, I'm not trying to copy the drawings exactly, I'm trying to do my own spin, and so I wanted to include that long hair as part of the sculpture, and it was tricky. Rin has that really straight jet black hair, and it's cut with the bangs straight across and the ends very straight across. And so I was trying to figure out how to make a hairstyle that felt like that and also captured a sense of movement, but on a horse. So you can see here, I started with not coils, but some really thin flat slabs that I put on like individual strands of hair. And in the book, Rin's hair is often shown like blowing in the wind or with her movement and moving around as these individual strands a lot. And so that's where this idea came from. And it really helped me visualize and figure out how to place her hair or her mane. You can see here I'm moving individual strands around, playing with the length and the direction that they're laying, and that really helped me figure out where the mane needed to be and how to shape it. But then I started feeling kind of stuck. So I switched to working on the tail, which is a strategy I like to use where if I get stuck on one part, I go to another part where I feel like I know what I'm doing, and then I come back to the part where I was stuck with fresh eyes. But then the tail wasn't feeling quite right, and I needed a break from it to get fresh eyes on it, so I went back to working on the mane. And I felt the most confident about the bangs, so I started attaching those first. Working with these skinny little slabs really helped me figure out how to make the ends of the hair feel like it was cut straight or a blunt cut across. But those individual strands were also what was making the hair not feel quite right. The individual strands were making the hair read more as braids or dreadlocks, and that wasn't the style I was going for. With fewer strands in the bangs, it felt more right. The hair was coming together feeling like straight hair that just has some gaps in it. So I took some time working on that while I mentally puzzled out what to do with the mane. But you know what it came down to? It came down to something that I already knew, which is the secret to drawing, or in this case, sculpting, hair. And that secret is that you don't treat hair as individual strands. You think of hair as one solid shape with shading and some details or texture in it. But you know the even deeper secret? I learned that from looking at drawings of Barbie when I was growing up. Her hair always looked so great, and so I would try to mimic the strategies that I saw for drawing hair in Barbie in my own drawings. Later, I also learned how to apply this when shading and doing more realistic drawings rather than stylized cartoons. But it had been a while since I had to think about it in a sculptural 3D sense. And so you're about to see how I handle that. Since the hair was reading like braids or dreadlocks with all the individual strands, I decided to just blend them together. Now, I could have taken those pieces off and tried to sculpt a solid piece, but I don't think I would have been able to get it to lay as perfectly over the neck the way that it did as individual strands, so blending it together helped me keep that shape. And I still wanted the ends of the hair to kind of separate and have the little gaps in the hair to show more movement with individual strands of hair. And now I'm giving her the opposite of a haircut. Extensions? So once I blended the top part of the mane together, the hair felt shorter, so it needed more length, especially because Rin's character's hair is really long, like down to her waist. And once I felt good about the mane, I went back to the tail, and then decided it was time to wrap up for the day, so I took a break and came back the next day, which is what you see now. And sometimes you really just need a little bit of distance from a project so that you can come back and do it right. One thing I knew about adding the mane was that I would need to connect it to the legs, which meant that I needed to finish refining the legs. So that's what I started with this day. Now, when I went home and showed my husband a picture of what I had done that day, he said something about the angle made the leg look like it was broken. And it could have been the camera angle, but it could also be that I didn't have the joints spaced apart correctly. So I decided to focus on this one bent leg, the back right leg, and really define it and get it shaped exactly how I wanted. So that way I could use that as the baseline for how to finish modeling the other 3 legs. When I got it to the point that I thought I wanted it at, I used this paper towel to isolate it and really look at the form, and realized that I had overdone it. And here you can see I softened a lot of those angles and points, and toned it down to better match the style of the rest of the figures. And once I felt good about that leg, I moved on to the other 3, trying to shave them down to be the same thickness, give them a little bit of shape where it's needed, but also remembering that these sculptures are stylized, so I didn't need to define every muscle and every joint and every detail. Just a little bit of thickness on the front of the feet to imply hooves. And you can see as I continued to refine the shape of the legs, I continued to refine how they connect, how they're attached to the body. So that way they don't start to feel disjointed or disproportionate. After working on the legs for a while, I felt like the back and the front legs might have ended up different heights. So that's why I used the ruler to measure the height of the horse at the withers, that's the shoulder, and at the haunches. And there was a very slight difference. I'm sure only I would know that it was there, but I still fixed it since I'm here, the clay is still wet, and I can. So I made the back just a smidge shorter by taking a little bit off the top of the haunches, as well as taking a little bit off the bottom of the legs or the hooves. Fun fact, there was a year in my life when my life felt horse-themed. We read Black Beauty and Justin Morgan Had a Horse and all these horse-themed books in my English class, and my mom got me a bunch of like how to draw horses books, and I've always loved learning animal facts and animal atlases, and my mom got me several books about horses and one specifically about Lipizzaners. Those are the white performance horses. And so I wouldn't consider myself a horse girl because I'm missing the component of riding frequently and taking care of a horse. But I learned a lot about horses and drew a lot of horses in that time, and I find it a little funny, maybe serendipitous, that leading up to this horse sculpture, I've sculpted 2 other horses out of clay, and am able to learn from the mistakes in the process of making both of those. And it's all just kind of funny because it's the year of the horse now, and I have plans to make another Dala horse. I probably won't make a video about making it, but I do want to paint it and make a video out of that. And then I want to make a stand for my Rapidash horse. And it's just kind of funny that I've got all these ideas for different horse-related projects in the year of the horse. Oh, did you see that? So I was working on the ears, and I accidentally took that one off, but it was for the best. The ears were way too small, and at first I was trying to add clay and sculpt them on the head, but it just was a lot easier to start from scratch, kind of form them in my hand first, and then attach them. Getting the shape of ears just right is really important to creating the horse's expression, or any animal really. The ears do a lot of work with showing us what the animal is thinking, kind of like eyebrows on a person. A small shift can be the difference between relaxed and alert. And I really wanted my sculpture to feel like she was looking back at you, so I perked both the ears forward. Okay, now to figure out this tail. So at first I started off with a shaped slab, and that just wasn't cutting it. So I found a reference of horse rear ends and really looked at the way the tail is shaped and how it flows down the back of the horse, and looked back at some pictures of the character Rin from the book and at her hair, and I tried to find a middle ground between a natural horse tail and the stylization from the character, which meant that one slab wasn't going to cut it. I was going to need to do the multiple skinny little slabs again, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. Something that's really important to remember when you're working on sculpture is that your work's likely going to be viewed from every side, not just one side. So when you're making two-dimensional art, like a drawing or a painting, you only have to worry about one side because that's all there is. But when you're working on sculpture like this, you really have to think about how will it look from every side. So as I'm sculpting the tail, you can see I keep turning the body so that I can see how the hair falls against the legs, not only from the back, but from the left and the right side, and the angles in between. And then I took a little break from working on the tail to work on this slab for the horse to stand on. Even though I'm not planning to attach it, I thought that it might help give the legs stability as it's drying, and I thought about even firing them together, but I don't think that I cut the depth of the little footholds the same because it felt like one of the legs got moved around funny while it was standing in there. But having that slab was really nice while I worked on the tail because I could easily rotate the horse without accidentally bending or damaging the legs. Just like the mane, the tail underwent a lot of modifications once I got the little slabs attached. I wanted to make it more similar to the mane, so the top of it needed to feel more connected, while the ends remained more loose and flowy. It took me a while to figure out how to really shape the top portion of the tail so that it didn't feel too plain, but it didn't feel too busy. I moved this little piece of clay around a lot until I figured out it wasn't that I needed some short hair at the top, it's that I needed to see more dimension in the strands of hair that were there. And so I ended up blending it in and it worked out great. I'm so happy with how this sculpture came out. So let's take a look at the final rotation. I'm really happy. I think she's beautiful from all angles. And one final comparison to the height of the dog. If you like these sculpture videos, I have plans to do the cow next. But until then, here's a couple links to other videos you'll probably like, including one to sculpting the monkey.